Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1. Stories in Scandal Water, it's where you need to be. Stories in Scandal Water, let's pour you a cup of tea.
Hello, Ashley.
hello, Candy.
We're back to talk more about E.T.
Yes, we are.
I'm having so much more fun with this episode than I realized I would.
Really?
I think it goes back to what we said last time. I had not seen this movie in
Decades?
and I did not realize how much I enjoyed it. So I know that you had some issues with the tiny teeth and spindly
fingers.
arms and
Ooh.
fingers.
Also, hello, Steven, who likes to shoot things through the leaves in the dark, opening to E.T.,
That's true.
opening to Jurassic Park. I was like, what is it, Steven? What is it?
It's called suspense.
It's called suspense.
It's called a good hook.
It did, and then in the little,
Yeah.
I even wrote in my notes, spindly fingers with exclamation
That
points.
is so funny.
It's a weird thing.
Well, I thought I would ask you, before we jump into talking in this episode more about the making of E.T.
Yes.
himself and the filming process, some more of our reactions, that type of thing. I thought I would start by asking you to share a little bit of the filmmaker perspective.
Sure.
What are a few of the things that struck you as you were watching the movie from the filmmaker angle?
From the filmmaker angle, I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if this was on purpose, but with Steven, everything's on purpose. So I thought it was interesting in the opening scene how he had the red, E.T.'s red chest was the same color as the red flashlights. So it almost looked like a bunch of hearts at first if you were looking at the light, and maybe that's why
Right.
E.T. he got left behind because he wandered off. I thought it was interesting to show, even with this alien puppet, I mean, I know he's an alien puppet, but to describe all of this emotion behind it, where he goes and he looks at the lights of the city. To just show us, he just wants to see beauty.
Right.
And he got left behind there. I talked about this in the last episode. I thought it was really smart to show things from the kid point of view because there is no male figure in the kids' lives. So we don't see any male faces up until Peter Coyote, about an hour and 15 into it. I think I wrote it down, but somewhere in there. And I love all the little moments that make things seem more real and more authentic.
Agree. That's something I wrote down too.
Just loved it.
I think we talked about this back when we were doing Jaws. He is just brilliant at highlighting the normal, everyday things, the normal, everyday interactions. Mike and his friends are so believable. The siblings and the way they talk to each other, the way they hang out, you just believe them.
You really do. It's a
Yeah.
gift. He has a definite gift.
He definitely does. One other thought I had to do with colors. Kind of piggybacks on what you said about starting with the leafy environment. I noticed that it started with such beautiful colors. It was so warm, and we had leafy green, and we had, I don't know, it just felt like this very homey, magical, pretty place. But I think I was contrasting it. I'm coming out of Star Wars, where things are so kind of
Spacey, gray.
Yes, very isolated looking, very brown, very...
Color is really important.
It really is. And so this just felt warm and beautiful until all of a sudden, later in the movie, when the government comes into
It's
play...
all white and
Yes.
sterile.
Yes, that is exactly the word I wrote down. We had such sterility. So we go from all of the very, very humane, relatable, close interactions of this family and these friends to all of a sudden everything is isolated, separated, sterile. Yeah, he did such a good job of being intentional about all the elements that create an emotion or a feeling within the audience. One other thought. one of their noticing the Star Wars nods.
I read that too.
Did you?
I was just looking at that. It has Star Wars toys and ET and a little smiley face. And then he used a little shark to feed the fish.
Yes.
And then we had Yoda later, of course. And there was a little strain of the Star Wars music. And that's what happens when you have a best friend that's George Lucas. He's like, sure, you can use my stuff in your movie. That's fine.
He shared that it was a surprise. He was watching it
George
with
didn't know?
George Lucas, and that when Yoda came out, George gave him a nudge and like smiled at him.
Okay, that's a real risk because, yeah, you're best friends, but
You're promoting. I think it was seen as promoting his friend's work. I think it was
Candy,
actually.
you and I put Yoda in the thing. You know we're gonna get
Oh,
sued.
we're gonna get sued.
We're gonna get sued so fast.
George Lucas is not sending us a note.
No, he's not.
No.
He's not gonna
Or
wink
he's
and
not
nod
gonna-
at
no,
us.
Yeah, but I think it was definitely from Steven Spielberg's mind a compliment to his friend.
Yeah, it was.
It was a little honor or something. Well, last time when we met, we talked a lot about the inspiration for the story, of course, and the importance of the script that Melissa Matheson created. But we lived a lot in the fact that this was a story about children and focusing on the perspective of a child. And just to revisit that idea for just a minute, I found this quote that I love because it directly makes the connection between that vision from Steven Spielberg and how it played out with his filmmaking. So I'm going to ask you to read this little excerpt from a BBC Culture article.
Spielberg, being in his mid-30s at the time of the film, was still relatively close to his subjects in age, which enables him to invest psychologically. That shows in the film's keen emotional impact, as well as in Spielberg's fresh cinematics, particularly the way his camera works at roughly the children's head height, investing physically in a child's universe, and his no-nonsense, puckish attitude toward children's banter, games, and worldview. Mostly the film scores because, as well as daring to literally place itself at its protagonist's height, it doesn't talk down to the child characters. These are children who rebel, who respond to their environment, who have agency in their own world, and whose pain is accorded as much importance as they give it themselves. Molly Haskell, author of Spielberg, A Life in Films, concurs, saying, I think E.T. has been hugely influential in prioritizing, even consecrating, the child's point of view over that of the grown-ups, whether authorities in uniform or distracted mothers. In E.T., Elliot and his siblings are the ones who carve out their own world, nursing the wounded alien, dressing it up, and returning it to its people by defying lawmakers.
I loved that because I felt like it affirmed the things that I think we've already said, but it brought out a new idea for me, which is the fact that the children are the ones with the agency.
They're running the story.
They are running. They are the ones who take care of things. They are the heroes.
They have the plan.
They save the day. I loved the mother. I mean, I really liked her, but she was not a strong character.
She wasn't. She was very distracted. I thought, seriously, this alien is in your kitchen and you do not see it. You know, you pay attention. Pay some kind of attention.
Right. And then she left her child alone. Yes. I had a hard time with that.
She's 6. She's like, here, stay here. I'll be right back. What?
I know. I could not. So I think the insights from this author who wrote the BBC Culture article, it was really insightful. I thought it was good.
Yeah. One of the notes I wrote in here midway through, I said, why don't they ever trust moms? You know, they always say, don't tell mom. Whatever you do, don't tell mom. And then as the film goes on, I was like, oh, well, that's why they didn't trust mom. Because as soon as they tell mom, she's like, get out of here. And she starts screaming. I'm like, oh, well, see, this is why they didn't tell you.
But they did a good job of still making her likable.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
And you could see
she was
that
dealing
she
with
was
her own
struggling.
stuff.
Yeah,
she's dealing with her own stuff.
You could see she was struggling. Yeah. Now, we've said a lot about that, but what we haven't yet said much about is E.T. himself.
Yes.
That's right. So there was an NPR article that came out just in December of 2022, so very recently, that talked about an original model of E.T. being sold at auction for $2.56 million. Here's what happened. So Julian's Auctions was holding this auction that they called Icons and Idols of Hollywood. It was held in partnership with Turner Classic Movies, and their draw was that they were presenting more than 1,300 Hollywood artifacts.
That'd be cool.
Right? But the biggest draw, or one of the biggest draws, was that they were also auctioning off this original mechatronic model of E.T. from the classic 1982 E.T. the
I
Extraterrestrial.
wonder why they would do that, not put it in a Smithsonian. Was there multiple copies, I'm guessing?
Well, not the way this read. This said the mechatronic model is considered an engineering masterpiece featuring 85 points of movement and earning the Italian special effects artist Carlo Rambaldi his third Academy Award in visual effects in 1983. The blurb on the auction website read, quote, "One of the rarest and most remarkable pieces of Hollywood memorabilia ever to come to auction. Julien's is honored to present one of the actual last surviving authentic animatronic E.T.s used during the making of the beloved and cherished blockbuster film E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which captured the hearts of audiences across the world."
It did say one of,
It did
but
say one of,
still,
yeah.
I cannot
It
believe
sounds
that.
very rare.
Yeah.
They went on to discuss it a little bit more on this website. They said that the small alien's extendable neck was inspired by one of Rambaldi's own paintings of women from his hometown in Italy, which he portrayed with long necks. Again, this is from that auction site. And it went on to share that Rambaldi believed the neck could act as an empathic way for E.T. to interact with humans. So the neck was a purposeful thing. All this leads us, that was a little teaser, to lead us into talking about the making of E.T.
The making of the actual robotic puppet?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, when it came to creating the alien, they did not know what they wanted it to look like. Stephen had worked with Carlo Rambaldi before. He is the special effects artist we just talked about, and they had worked together on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Stephen loved his work, so he asked him to work on this project too, and he agreed. Stephen and his team knew that they did not want it to be a monster. That was something that was a parameter that they put out there, but he really didn't know what he wanted it to be. He said, quote, "I remember saying to Carlo, here's some pictures of Albert Einstein, Ernest Hemingway, and Carl Sandburg. I love their eyes. Can we make E.T.'s eyes as frivolous and also wizened and as sad as those three icons?"
That's not asking for much.
Right? So what happened was, and they showed this in the making of E.T., people were like, these people on the team started looking at lots of pictures. They started doing lots of drawings, and they were all over the wall. And Stephen would just start going, "I like that. I don't like and I'm sure it wasn't just Stephen. I'm sure his team was working on this as well. But they just started to kind of flesh out the outward appearance of E.T. by using all these pictures and drawings.
I'm just going to say, as a person who never wants to hurt anyone's feelings, can you imagine being Stephen and being someone that works for Stephen and working really, really hard on something and putting it up there and then going, "I don't like that." Just like, oh my gosh. If it was me, I'd be like, "I really love what you did here." And I would just apologize all over the place and be like, "But it's just not quite fitting the vision of what I'm so sorry. It's my fault. It's me. It's not you. It's me."
Right.
But he's just like, nope.
Yeah.
Yes. God, I can't imagine.
Well, I mean, how do you hit a target when
That's moving?
Yes. I mean, to have absolutely no idea other than, well, let's start with some, pictures of these three iconic guys and,
give me some
let's
sad
capture
eyes.
their eyes. Well, bless their hearts. They somehow figured it out. And there is a book that came out, I think it's been in the last 2 years. Obviously, I've not read it, but it probably is amazing. It's called E.T. the Extraterrestrial, The Ultimate Visual History.
Ooh.
And some sources talked about this book, of course, and they said that it shares how technicians and special effects artists built the physical version of E.T. in just 6 months, which they said was an absolutely massive undertaking on such a short timeline.
Yes, it would be.
And they said, they gave him a lot of credit for doing a good job because this one fella who wrote for the Washington Post commented that viewers may forget E.T. is, quote, "a suit augmented with animatronics." He also goes on to say that he thinks that the E.T. creation of this alien was part of the reason behind its remarkable success because, quote, "he remains one of the most soulful, expressive special effects ever conceived. E.T. has personality and character and emotion, and he moves like a living thing. He seems genuinely alive."
He does, yeah.
CNN chimes in and says, "Considered an engineering masterpiece, this one-of-a-kind animatronic figure featuring 85 points of articulation predates the advent of CGI, computer graphic imagery, effects in filmmaking, and obviously it was designed, developed, and engineered in 1981, which makes it even more impressive.
Yeah. And Stephen and George both, I think, like to use practical instead of CGI.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it wasn't around then. They didn't have any choice. But you're saying even now they try to kind of use some of the
I don't
old
know.
strategies?
I think so. I mean, even back then when CGI was coming to, I'm going back to our Jurassic Park episode where it was available, but he wanted to use the life-size puppets instead.
Well, it was brought to life by a whole team of animators using electronic and mechanical elements, and they talked about the fact that it was impressive that its movements included facial expressions, neck movements. It had the glowing finger.
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg himself at one point described it as the eighth wonder of the movie world. So he was very happy with it. They even got a woman named Beverly Hoffman from an eye institute to create glass eyes for E.T. And Stephen was the one who decided that when the heart light came on, he wanted the organs inside E.T. to be visible.
To be
so that
shown.
was, yes. Now, they did have some living people who helped bring E.T. to life as well. They did not always have someone who was inside the E.T. suit, but sometimes they did have to put somebody there, even though it was also being controlled by a team of mechanical operators.
Okay.
But if E.T. was required to walk or move about, that's when they needed somebody.
Okay.
They had two performers who have both passed away, Tamara Detrow and Pat Billon, who both had dwarfism, who helped them to do this. But one of the other humans who helped them was a young boy named Matthew Demerit. So he was one of the three performers who gave E.T. movement.
Oh, so they had a young boy. Interesting.
He was born without legs, and he was contacted and asked if he wanted to do a screen test, and when he did, he was hired. He gave an interview to Mirror back in 2002, which was reported and talked about in the Entertainment Tonight article that I found. And here's what Matt said. Any scene where they wanted E.T. to fall over, they would use me. The suit was made of rubber, and they sprayed it with something to make it look sticky. There were slits in the chest for me to look out of, and the head sat on top of my head. He was the one who did the famous scene where E.T. drinks beer.
Okay.
He said that it was really hot, and Steven Spielberg came up to him and asked if he was all right.
Yeah.
And then he wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to get hurt, so he was, checking on Matt, making sure he was okay. And then after he figured all that out, he said to him, is there any way you could just walk straight into that cabinet there and just kind of fall on your butt and get back up, turn around, and for the grand finale, fall smack on your face?
Is that okay? Can you do that?
Yes, and he did.
Okay.
And he did.
Well, he was a kid. They recover really well.
Yes, and Drew Barrymore talked about how much fun she had hanging out with him on the set, so they were good friends too. Ben Burt was the sound design person who created E.T.'s voice. He used the human voice of a woman named Pat Welsh, and then he had to do some electronic adjustment to the pitch of her voice. And then he went on to explain that he had to meld that with other things. He said in this BBC article, I created the voice for E.T. out of many different things, about 18 different people and animals and sound effects.
Wow.
There are raccoons in there. There are sea otters. There are some horses. There's a burp from my old cinema professor from USC.
Nice.
Yes, I love it. They also used a mime to help make a few of E.T.'s arm movements look more realistic. Steven said that when he saw the mechanical arms, they were great, but they were very jerky sometimes.
Yeah.
The fingers would move, but almost a little too thoughtfully sometimes. So he felt that E.T. needed to have almost balletic arms, almost like the hands of a mime. They put it out there, and they ended up hiring a mime who they would then make up, the mime's hand so that the artist could be artistic when picking things up or touching certain things or reaching out. So that's how they sometimes use the mime.
Interesting. Also, where do I go to when he puts things out there and they like respond? Where do I go to sign up for wherever he puts things out there and then this guy's like, I'll do it. I would like to be on that mailing list, please.
And how crazy. We're looking for a mime for our Alien movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, sure. Of course, you probably know this. ILM worked on this. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know it, but I would expect it.
Yes, Industrial Light and Magic. Of course, we know them through George Lucas.
His bestie.
That's right. According to, I went straight to the source. I went to the ILM website, and they said that they created the now iconic image of E.T. and Elliot flying over the face of a full moon using the studio's Go Motion technology combined with exquisitely crafted miniatures and puppet characters shot on a blue screen and then seamlessly inserted into live action plates.
It's beautiful. And that's his logo. Steven's logo is Amblin, which was his first, I think his first film, but then his logo is Elliot and E.T. flying over that moon.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about iconic.
Yes.
Well, they worked on that special effects for a very long time, and I'm sure they did other things as well. That was the example I pulled out. But the ILM effects team was honored with an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects for their efforts in 1982.
As they should be.
Yeah. So the book that I've already referenced, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, The Ultimate Visual History, gave a little bit more detail about that same scene. And what they said was that the team from ILM had to create a model forest and a miniature puppet figure riding a bicycle, and then had to spend, they said months. Other sources did not say it was months, but they had to go out into the dark and find the perfect setting to have the perfect telephoto shot of the full moon rising above the horizon. Because that part of it was real.
Okay.
So this one fella who
And
worked...
anyone who's tried to take a picture of the moon knows it is so hard to get a picture of the moon. It just looks like a little blurry, you know.
Well, he talked about this. Okay, you do such a good job with your segues. This fellow named Michael Pangrazio, who worked as a matte supervisor on the film, said in that book, quote, "When looking at the moon in real life, it's the size of your pinky fingernail when your arm is stretched out all the way. It's pretty small, but ours is exaggerated. We wanted to show all the craters and detail. If we had created it with paint or cotton or backlighting, it would have been too simplistic. We had to go for the real thing. And in the end, it paid off."
Yeah, I did. That was beautiful.
The spaceship. Remember E.T., of course.
He got left behind.
He does. He gets left behind, and then
Like Kevin
he
in
also
Home Alone.
flies away. So we
Yes.
needed a good spaceship.
Yes.
So Ralph McQuarrie is the fella responsible for that. He said that Stephen asked to meet with him one day at ILM, very briefly said, "Here's kind of what I'm looking for the spaceship," said it was really very vague, to the point of Stephen even saying, it could even be Dr. Seussish if you want. And said, come up with
Go do it.
something.
Go do it.
And Ralph said this was very overwhelming because it was like, it could be anything. It could be anything. But he got lucky, I think, in some ways, because he hit exactly what Stephen loved. He came back with a proposal, and Stephen was like,
was a different-
"Yup, let's do that."
It was an interesting. It was tall instead
Yeah.
of thin and wide. I thought that was. It was more Seuss looking. I thought.
Kind of a lipped, almost eggish in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah.
The score.
Oh, John Williams.
I
My first
know.
note. John Williams music. That's the guy you got to get.
And it's amazing.
It's so beautiful.
Has the man had any fails?
I don't think so.
Well, of course, he used the master, John Williams. On the podcast episode, I mentioned it when we did Harrison Ford. Steven Spielberg was interviewed on Smartless, and he did reference his collaboration with John Williams, who he calls Johnny. And I thought this was just a lovely little story. I'm taking this little rabbit trail here. But he shared that John Williams made a point to do the score for his autobiographical movie, The Fabelmans.
I want to see
out-
that.
Yeah, it came out, a year or two ago?
Yes. Yes.
And that was Steven's last movie as director.
Wait, like ever?
That's what he's saying.
What?
That's what he's saying.
Oh.
And John Williams also agreed to do the last Indiana Jones movie for him. He's not directing, but he is executive producing, I think. So kind of, I think, a little favor to him that he finished these out for Stephen.
Oh, it feels like the end of an era.
Yes. Well,
Oh.
and okay, this is going to get your heart. He said, remember, Fabelmans is autobiographical,
Yes.
of course, so incredibly personal
Yes.
to Stephen. And so Stephen shared that as a special gift to him and his parents, John composed this one song in particular for the movie The Fabelmans that literally brought him to tears. He said it was comparable. The only other time that he was brought to tears in the same way was when he first heard the main theme for Schindler's List that John Williams had created for him. So he said it absolutely just touched him. And then he goes on to say that out of his entire career, his work with John Williams has been his greatest collaboration.
Oh, yes.
And he says, I've had many great
Yes.
collaborative experiences
Yes.
and relationships, but that one takes
Music
the cake.
absolutely makes it.
Well, and just their respect and the way they work together. I just love that. Before we go on, should we take a quick little break?
Sure. I need to recover from this whole Stephen retiring thing.
If you love Scandal Water and would like to help us keep the tea brewing, simply go to www.buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod, where you can become a monthly supporter or give a one-time gift. Cheers! And we are back. So we've talked about the development, the creation of E.T. and the score, but just to say just a tiny bit more about the filmmaking process, Stephen as the director. We've already said that the kids, the child actors said that he could get the best out of them. Henry Thomas said that Stephen was always in his ear, like he was always there giving suggestions and feedback, and I saw it. I heard it. He was so affirming. Like I thought Steven Spielberg would be intimidating, but watching him, the way he would talk to those kids, the way he would give them feedback, the way he would give suggestions, I was like, I would want to work for this man. He was so loving to them. And Henry Thomas joked that when he was watching the film for the first time at the premiere, that he kind of imagined that he had Stephen in his ear still. Like it was such a part of his experience. But he said, another comment he made, Henry, was that he was ready for the goodbye scene because Stephen had already worked through it with him. Like this man was in it with these children, and he dressed up for Halloween with them. Like he celebrated occasions with them.
He felt like their father, or he felt like a father figure to them.
Absolutely. He acted that way. They treated him that way. It was a beautiful thing. Something else that came out in the Drew Barrymore reunion show was in how the whole cast and crew interacted like a family. It was such a loving environment for them. They all talked about how lovely Melissa Matheson was.
Oh, good. Was she on set?
It sounded like she was there a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. In
nice.
fact, sometimes she would, when a new part of the script was released to the kids, she'd be the one that would read through it with them and kind of review with them.
That's lovely.
Basically a pre-rehearsal, you know. They said she had such a warm personality. She was so approachable. She was wonderful. Dee Wallace talked about the very first day she met Drew. Drew was sitting on her lap within the first few minutes. These people all connected and lasting impact. I know I've already shared one quote from Drew Barrymore, but I'm going to read just one more. Steven Spielberg, he cast me as Gertie when I was just 5 years old, and that changed my life. He gave me a purpose and a clear understanding of love and respect. He gave me a family that changed my perception on family forever. The cast, Robert and Henry and Dee, I truly became a family with them. We were very protective, very nurturing. Stephen was our patriarch for sure. I considered him like a father. I didn't have one growing up, and he still feels like that to me to this day. And I always carry the message of this film. I think it is so much a part of who I am and why I am this way, because this movie is about how we should always fight for the things we love. And just because something or someone is different, unfamiliar, we shouldn't be afraid to protect that. We shouldn't turn our backs on that. We should embrace our differences and learn from each other.
Wow. She's so insightful.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. One last little cute story here. Drew turned to Henry and Robert on the set and she said, "So I understand I had boyfriends all the time?"
Yeah.
And they start laughing and they go on to say, "Yup, you would have a boyfriend, but it would be for just one day." And Robert McNaughton says, "One day it was Tommy, the next day it would be Henry, the next day it would be me or Casey or Sean." And then Henry Thomas jumps in. It was so cute. He goes, "The funny thing was, though, we all kind of took it seriously." He said, we were like, "Oh, Drew's eating lunch with Tommy today. Guess I'm out." It was adorable.
She's so precious. I would be like, yes, I would want that too.
I know. I just love that. Oh, and just fun little side note. Drew ended up introducing Robert McNaughton later, of course, to the woman that he eventually married.
Oh,
Yeah.
His sister introduced him.
That's right.
That's cute.
So, response to the film. We haven't talked about this yet. E.T. was released in theaters in June of 1982. Dee Wallace shared that she was afraid she had ruined her career with this film.
Why?
She said that the first time she saw it was at Universal with all the producers and executives. She said it was terrible. She was sitting in the back and she said nobody reacted.
Yeah.
She went home to her husband and said, "I think my career's over." And she said that her husband took her hand and said, "Come on, we're going to go see it with an audience."
Yes.
And she said that when she sat in that theater and people were screaming and crying and standing up and yelling, and she said her husband leaned over, took her hand and said, "What do you think now, sweetheart?"
What a good husband.
Yeah.
What a good guy.
So in 1982, it came in number 1 for the year.
I heard
in the box office.
I heard that it was one of the only films that it ran for a solid year. Like, that's unheard of.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
IMDb trivia said
Wow.
it ran for a year in the cinema.
That is crazy.
Yes.
Wow. No, I didn't even see that. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I did see that it quickly became the highest grossing film of all time and maintained that title for over a decade until
Jurassic Park. He beat his own record.
Can you imagine?
No,
Oh my
I can't.
goodness.
Obviously, I can't. But they also opened on the same day, June 11th. E.T. I think if I read the trivia right, June 11th, E.T. opened, June 11th, Jurassic Park opened.
We got some superstitious people here.
We do.
They're like,
I'm going to
"Oh,
open something on June 11th.
Well, it was produced on a budget of a little over 10 million, but the film racked up nearly 360 million from its original release in the US. To this day, it has now earned almost 800 million worldwide.
Wow.
It was nominated for 9 Oscars at the 1983 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Steven Spielberg, but it won 4 of those 9, which were Best Original Score, Best Visual Effects, Best Sound, and Best Sound Editing. It was named one of cinema's greatest films in Time's all-time 100 list. It has inspired a hit ride at Universal Studios. It got a shout out in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, they said, or at least
George repaid the favor of Yoda. He put him in the little the General Assembly or whatever it was. Yeah, he's in that. E.T. is.
Well, at the end of the Drew Barrymore reunion episode, the idea of a sequel came up. And Drew turned to the cast, her family members there, and she said, "What do you all think?" And Henry Thomas spoke first, and he said, "You know what? We've now lost Melissa Matheson." And she was the heart, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, basically, she was the heart of the original script. I don't know that we'd want to do it without her.
Yeah.
And Dee Wallace chimes in and says, "It was a classic.
Yeah.
Leave it alone."
Yeah.
And then Drew chimed in, and, apparently she and Steven really have remained close. It sounds like she hangs out with him, they talk, but she said that she once heard Steven say he would never make a sequel. And that is something that I came across in several sources. I saw where he himself has been quoted as saying,
I'm not going to do it.
He's not going to do it. And one of the things that he said was he felt like a sequel robs the original work of its powers because sequels are generally not as good, but then the sequel ends up being what's remembered.
Right. This was actually a very good sequel. The Ralphie, the Christmas Story Christmas. I thought it was a good sequel.
Yes.
I thought it completed that story.
Yes.
I don't think you could do that with this because then E.T. has to come back, and then what do you say? They're not children anymore. What story could you tell? You'd just be doing a cash grab almost.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because were you the person who sent it to me, or did I run across it on my own? But there was an Xfinity commercial.
We found it independently because I found it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Henry Thomas said that over the years he has been approached countless times about doing commercials or other projects somehow related to E.T. And he said really it never even came down to whether he would say it. It always came down to Steven's approval, whether something's going to be allowed or not. And Steven approved this Xfinity commercial. It's about 4 minutes long. It was made in 2015 for NBC's 93rd Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade called A Holiday Reunion. Steven served as the consultant on the film. Henry Thomas did his role as Elliot, but of course now it's after 30 years and he's grown up.
He's an adult.
The premise is he's now got his own family and E.T. returns to Earth to celebrate the holiday season with them. John Williams authorized their being able to use his music for the film, and this was used as a Christmas commercial in 2019 for Sky. Henry himself has said that he was happy with it and that he thinks it might be the closest that they would ever get to a sequel.
I think it's right because it's just brief enough. And how do you make 90 minutes out of what they did there? You don't want any conflict. You want it to be just this sweet little reunion, which is what it is. And I thought it was clever that they cast Elliot's son to look so much like Elliot because E.T. mistakes him for Elliot.
Yes. I mean, there were so many little nods and touching things about it that I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was very sweet.
I thought it was very well done. In fact, we definitely need to put that in our show notes.
And all the comments on the YouTube are like, I'm sobbing. This is so much nostalgia. People just loved it.
Armchair psychologist.
For our armchair, as we bring this to a close, I thought I would just open the floor.
Okay.
We've both rewatched
Yes.
the movie. Do you have anything else you would like to share?
Well, I wrote down a few of my favorite quotes.
Oh, yes.
As I
wanna
was
hear
going
this.
through it.
Okay.
And there's only a few. There's really a few. It comes from the end where I love the way the siblings talk to each other because it felt so real.
Mm-hmm.
So his brother is asking where something is, and Elliot says, I don't know streets. Mom always drives me. So I thought that was really cute. And the brother says, I've never driven forward before.
Yes.
And then the final one, oh no, I love Drew Barrymore saying, I don't like his feet. And they said that was an ad lib, but it just seems so cute. She's just like, I don't like his feet. And they're like, get over it or whatever. But the final one that I just the way that Henry Thomas delivers this, and these are all comical lines. I mean, the sweet lines were, of course, very sweet. But his friend says something, Greg, the one that always wore the headset. He says, can't he just beam up? And then Elliot looks at him dead serious and goes, this is reality, Greg. So I want to incorporate that into my everyday dialogue. If someone says something, I'm going to go, this is reality, Greg.
I love it.
They were just so adult. They were such little adults.
Those are good quotes.
Yes.
I like it. Hey, this is such a turn, but this is kind of interesting, and I just realized I hadn't shared it. Did you know that Harrison Ford actually filmed a scene for this movie that did not make it?
He was the teacher.
The principal.
Yeah. Oh, I thought he was going to play the teacher and he couldn't do that. But yes, I do remember reading that in the IMDb that he had a part in it.
He was supposed to, I think, basically reprimand Elliot after he let all the frogs go.
That was another thing, the frog scene. I wrote in my notes, I was like, killing the frogs. No.
I know.
Yeah, I was so happy he let them go. I was having trouble when they were going to chloroform them.
I was getting a little disturbed myself.
I was very upset. I would have been just like him, like, be free. I don't care. Get out of here. Yeah, that was very upsetting.
And what a brilliant idea to have Elliot experience what E.T. was going through, which again, I think this was a touch from Melissa Matheson here. But it was wonderful acting for a 10-year-old boy to do that whole scene and to be playing as though he'd been drinking and then he lets those frogs go and has to kiss the girl, which Steven Spielberg said Henry Thomas absolutely hated.
He was probably terrified.
He hated having to kiss her.
I bet he wouldn't hate it now, but being 10 years old.
At the time.
And part of what makes me think I'd never seen this film before is the questions I was asking myself as I took notes. I said, did E.T. lure him to sleep? Why did Elliot get scared at the fridge? Why did Gertie call her mother Mary? Why does Elliot's chest hurt? Why don't they ever trust the mom? I was just like asking myself all these questions until I figured out that they were empathetically connected. I was like, what is happening? Why is he acting this way? Oh, the burp. Finally at the burp, I have on here, Elliot burps. They are definitely connected. So that's when I put it together.
But how nice that they let us figure that out.
Yes.
You know, they let it go. They trusted their audience to get there without smacking us over the head with it.
It wasn't on the nose.
Yes. Well, that was lovely.
That was a lovely
I enjoyed
walk
our
down nostalgic
Yes,
lane.
I enjoyed our visit
I did
with
too.
with E.T. and
Despite his spindly fingers and tiny teeth.
which is so funny because so much of what I read and I shared in this episode was everyone saying how lovable and relatable, and your whole reaction to him is E. Like
He's E.T.
you did not feel it at all.
I didn't, but I respect the people that did. And I respect the story, and I thought it was a lovely story. And when they were saying goodbye to E.T., I did feel a little well up, like, I'm sad for them. You know, that kind of thing. So it's a beautiful story.
Yes. And I loved that our lonely boy who was struggling with the loss of his dad and his family basically
E.T.
being torn apart and his older brother not letting him play with his friends.
Yes.
They really did kind of set him apart. He was kind of isolated.
Yeah.
And by the end of that movie,
They were siblings. They were a family again.
They were a family. They were united, and he was empowered.
Do you get the feeling that Peter Coyote was going to be the new dad?
I wondered.
I did. I felt like, this is going to be your new dad. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'd been through a traumatic experience together. They were all going to bond together.
Yeah.
And one thing Brian said when he said, do you want to be alone with him? And they leave him alone with E.T. Brian's like, they would never allow that. They're never going to let this kid be alone with E.T.
No.
They're like going to haul him out of there. Yeah, that's
so
the most
true.
unrealistic part. The government people leave you alone with the alien.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. All right. Well, as we bring this to a close,
Yes.
How about a big cheers to Steven Spielberg?
Yes.
And
Henry Thomas.
All the actors, Dee
All the
Wallace,
actors.
Robert McNaughton, Drew Barrymore.
That sold this film.
Yes, such a beautiful job. Such a beautiful job. Cheers to you guys.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.